But that's the thing. It's like certain properties are just better at doing crossovers and co-branding than others.
Someone in
Lego,
chat said genre for
yeah,
a
Sword of
possibility.
Shannara. That's not a bad one. It's too obscure. They tried to do a television show and it didn't work. So it's
What
too.
about Wheel of Time?
Wheel of Time, maybe,
What about Song of Ice and Fire for D&D, where it's like,
maybe. But there's already a Song in Ice and Five RPG though. I think.
there you go.
You see, I'm you know, the more we're talking about it, the more I'm convinced that D&D just does not lend itself to
That's what I'm
crossovers.
saying. Is that, or if it does, people already do their
Yeah,
own RPG for it instead.
yeah. Like
But it's different to be like make your own wildly popular collectible card game to be like make your own RPG.
So we got a
Uh,
super chat saying The Witcher.
Witcher,
Witcher has
you
its
know,
own
that's in the
RPG
super
though.
chat.
It has its own. It just came out.
Yeah,
I mean, everything has its own RPG. That's the thing. It's because no one wants to work with someone else because
that's
unless
just the thing about RPGs that's different for the cards because there's so much distro stuff and other
yeah,
things that you have to figure out for the cards. Whereas for RPG, you can just write it
yeah,
and it's a book. People know how to do a book.
yeah. And right, like there was crossovers with Magic and Hot Pockets. Like
Yeah,
that weirdly makes sense because you're not gonna get like the Hasbro isn't gonna start making Hot Pockets.
I remember when those crossovers for the Hot Pockets Planeswalkers came up, and someone was like, "This Planeswalker died recently. Why is he on this Hot Pocket
right.
meatball Hot Pocket?" And I said, "Well, obviously you can't make meatball Hot Pockets out of him while he's still alive."
But that's the thing. It's that certain properties like Lego. So I would say if we rank like crossover, co-brand potential, books very high. Like that's at the very top because it's a book. And those have been around forever. Legos very high because Legos literally they can create whatever they want in the world of Lego and they're cool. Like I mean, the Ornithopter looks freaking awesome. You know, it just looks great. It's Dune. It's just freaking neat. Okay.
Card sets can easily cross over.
What's that?
Obviously, I said card sets or like card games that want to
Some,
do a set to
yeah,
cross
card
over.
games moderately. I would say, I won't say, I'll say high. I won't say like on the scale of
Fair
1 to
enough. It's
10, like,
definitely way less than Legos
oh, it's less than Legos. It's like
by a lot.
it's like high to medium. You know, obviously you have to have the card. In this case, let's just say Magic. Like Lorcana is never going to cross over with anything else that's not Disney, so there's no reason because Lorcana exists to be in the Disney universe, and Marvel can obviously they're going to figure out how to make it within Magic. But one of the reasons Magic is around 30 years later is because it is a extremely well-designed system that has stood the test of time and is unbelievably resilient. Because I remember in 1993, 94, and 95, the RPG, the collectible card wars. And when Magic came out, everyone, and I mean everyone, was coming out with the collectible card game. It was madness back then. Star Trek came out with one. Dungeons and Dragons came out with one. You name it. I think there was a Dune one. There was like everyone came out with it and they're all gone because none of them could stand the test of time and I remember playing them all because we were so excited. We played Magic and I was sitting there and I still say this today. I was like, is it possible that the very first collectible card game was so good that no one has iterated better? And 30 years later the answer is kind of, yeah. It's really hasn't. No one's done it better. It just hasn't been done better. It's kind of amazing, except for the digital collectible card games. They, I believe, have done better, but they have advantages of being digital, and there's a lot of reasons for that. But anyhow, yeah, Spellfire. I remember I was excited about
Oh,
Spellfire,
Spellfire.
and the art was crap, and the cards were as thin as tissue paper, and I was like. I bought a set and I think I threw it out. I was like, ugh, this is garbage. This is never gonna last. It felt like a cash grab, and it was a cash grab. Um, yeah, Pokemon and Yu-Gi-Oh, but those are played, I'd say, more. They do very well, but they're played more relaxed or as a
Sure, but
as a hobby.
they make a ton of money.
Yeah, no,
So
Pokemon makes it. You're absolutely right. Okay, those two. Galactic Empires, by the way, that was a great game. And I still have my Galactic Empires sets, and I have all the dice because you needed a ton of dice with Galactic Empires. That was great.
Mirto super chatted said that they need to get better sci-fi into D&D. If they did that, there would be a lot more properties that would work. Fantasy has fewer big properties.
Okay, the problem with that is science fiction in fantasy or science fantasy is very hard to pull off because of guns. And
that's not the only reason.
That's not the only reason.
TTRPGs with science fiction, science fantasy tend to sell worse. That's the industry understanding. Yeah. Even if you have a Star Wars or a Star Trek slapped onto that, and it's good, they tend to sell. If your same company has a big fantasy one, they tend to sell significant amount less. There are some that break the trend. Starfinder, for example. Yeah. The Starfinder core rulebook outperformed expectations, even though the fraction that you're supposedly supposed to be able to do with the science fiction, science fantasy was lower than Starfinder. Obviously, Pathfinder and fantasy was like the first line that's there. Pathfinder is a strong line, but Starfinder was really strong, unexpectedly. But that's kind of an exception to the industry wisdom that have been told by people who've been in multiple companies that make these, that it just doesn't do as well.
Nope.
I think that part of it too is the genre conventions are a lot more varied. And so the types of stories that you tell in fantasy are often epic heroes' journeys that work well with the kind of long-term tabletop RPG that we're talking about for some of these top-selling tabletop RPGs, whereas science fiction has like 40 different genre conventions and any one of them could be the main thing people think of or want. And you probably need a different RPG for each of them to really do it the most justice, between like episodic civilization of the week versus giant space opera versus like noir cyberpunk and all of these other things. Like, you probably want a different system every time to do all of those. Whereas fantasy, it's easier to sort of catch all a little bit.
Yeah,
and people in chat are saying similar things about political intrigue, combat stories, and other types of stories that you can see in science fiction, science fantasy.
There's a lot of issues, but the biggest issue is like, there's a couple. I mean, you know better than I do, but there's like, how do you not give them flying at level 1? How do you not have all combat become ranged combat? How do you get science fiction? How do you get magic and magic type effects in the science fiction world? It's just hard, because for better or for worse, D&D and the fantasy genre is sort of the template. And then by trying to put science fiction on the fantasy template, it doesn't work very well. Starfinder works very well because it's science fantasy, and they're very open about it, and because it's not based on anything. Like, if you're basing your game off Star Trek or Star Wars, well, then you got to follow the rules of Star Wars, And it's like, okay, well, they have sword combat. Yeah, if you're a Jedi, and Jedis are very rare. You can't have everyone being a Jedi. It's like, otherwise you're a bounty hunter, and then you get like ranged weapons. It's like, it's very hard. So you have to not only make a science fiction property, but you have to make a science fiction property that's brand new, that doesn't exist. What's the chances of that and being successful? Almost zero. And the only reason Starfinder, I think, works so well is that it came out at a really good time. D&D was kind of in the dumps. It was just starting to get its footing back. Pathfinder, I think, was kind of at the end of its life, first edition. People were excited about second edition. I know I was like,
they didn't know about second edition yet.
Right. But I was bored with first edition. I mean, we were like the second Starfinder. We're like, thank God. Like, I couldn't play another game of first edition D&D of Pathfinder. I was like, oh my God, I've played this so much. I am done. And it was just something, and it felt like Pathfinder in a science fiction, fantasy, goofy
in space
world. But it was fun. And it was also, it's very goofy. It's very Guardians of the Galaxy. And that was nice. You can't, I want hard science fiction. I want Guardians of the Galaxy science fiction. And it was a lot of fun.
And some people want hard science fiction. It's why science fiction is so hard to get right. But Starfinder is great.
Yeah, Starfinder is a lot of fun. And it's just goofy. I mean, it's just really, it was a lot of fun. It's a lot of goofiness. It's a really good game. But you know what? For every Starfinder, you could probably name 500 failed attempts. Someone here also said, why didn't Hasbro put out G.I. Joe, Transformers, and all their games? It's a good question
for... I wondered that when they just licensed that out.
Yeah, they gave it to Renegade. Renegade does all their properties. Because it's a lot...
They could have, because they owned both the IP and... like their own people who make RPGs, but I guess they figured that D&D was a popular enough IP on its own that they didn't need to co-brand it with their other IPs in that way.
Well, there's a minimum number of people. So think of it this way. Let's just say you need a minimum team. I'm just going to make up a number of 20 people to make and run a viable TTRPG brand. And if you need 20 people to do a G.I. Joe, and you feel like that thing is going to make, I'm just making up numbers, $5 million, or you can have 40 people work on the D&D property, and that will make $100 million. It's like, okay.
And then you let someone else work on G.I. Joe themselves, right. It's like, and then you get $500,000 for doing nothing except approving a few things.
Exactly.
Which
so it's
costs
like
one person,
right?
And therefore it's twice as efficient as having 20 people to make the $5 million. Yeah, I see why.
Yeah, because you need a minimum number of people to work on this property, and if it's not going to sell enough, which they probably think it wasn't, it's like, well, why even bother? Let's just give it to someone else, and we get money for free.
Some people in chat are saying risk management about how much it would sell.
Yeah,
make someone else take the risk, and then take all the take your cut of the profits if it goes well.
I guarantee it. Yeah, it's a risk management issue. Yeah, they want to make sure that it worked. They don't need to worry about it. They hand it off to someone else. They make the money. It's like it's a good. It's good.
That makes sense.
Oh yeah. That's exactly what happened. And that's the thing. It's like all these properties have a minimum amount. Like I don't do this anymore. Well, let's put it in let's do, I was going to say DVDs. Let's talk about hardcover books, since that's something we do know about. You need to print realistically a minimum of 1,000 books. And let's just say a minimum of 1,000 books cost, I'm just going to make up a number, approximately $10,000. That is the entry point to start printing up books. You can't really do it for less. It's like, oh, can I sell 50 books for $1,000? No. You could sell 50 books for $10,000, or you could sell 100 books for $10,000, or you can sell 1,000 books for $10,000. You need to invest. The bare minimum is 10 grand. That is the bare minimum you need to start getting into printing. And because there's a sunk cost, you need to make sure it's worth your while. And that's the same thing. To make a TTRPG, a brand new one, there's a significant sunk cost. And if it's just too high, then you give it to someone else. And that's why you do it. And back to the original statement, that's why Marvel teamed up with Hasbro, because they're like, can't they just make their own game? Sure. Do you know how hard it's going to be for them to make their own game and to put it out there? Why bother? It's just easier to have them work with Magic. And yeah, they don't get all the monies, but they get a lot of the money And all they need to do is put a couple people on the team at Marvel to talk with the people in Magic. Magic people, Hasbro's doing all the work. They're doing all the printing. They're designing the cards. They're probably going to get all the art. Although they probably work with Marvel on the art assets, because then if you get famous artists from Marvel comic books doing the art for that, then there's a collectible side on both sides. You know, you can see the synergies.
You want there to be a collectible side on both sides.
Right. But the point is, it's so much easier. And that's where these co-brands come from, because... Okay, I'm going to tell you the weirdest co-brand I ever worked on.
Okay, what is the weirdest co-brand you were ever
on? Toys R Us and Amazon.
That's not that weird. Like, they both
back in the
sell
day,
stuff.
Well, this is in the 90s when Amazon wasn't Amazon and it was $9 a share.
Okay, fair enough.
Is that Toys R Us, just follow me, didn't want to make up their own website. This is in the mid 90s, late 90s, because it was too much work. It's too hard for them to make a site. So instead of making their own website, they're like, we'll just put it all on Amazon and we'll have Amazon make our site for us. So they had Amazon make the Toys R Us website and they put it on Amazon. So if you wanted to buy stuff at Toys R Us, you went to Amazon and then everything was there. But it was the Toys R Us website. It just happened to be on Amazon. And I remember going to the Toys R Us offices in New Jersey, and even then I was like, "This is a weird co-brand." like I kept thinking, I was doing websites for a couple years at that point. I'm like, why are you giving out all your goodwill and your branding to Amazon? Like, Toys R Us was a huge brand back then. Amazon was nobody; they were nothing, but they just didn't want to deal with it. If you look,
they didn't want to grow up. They were a Toys R Us kid.
Toys R Us kid. They wanted to say Toys R Us kid. I don't want to grow up. I'm a Toys R Us kid. Well, guess what? You look up the history of co-brand deals. That turns out to be one of the worst co-brand deals in history. If you look it up, because sure enough, it did amazing business for Amazon. And it helped grow them because they did that with a couple of companies. And if it wasn't for those co-brand deals, Amazon might not be around today. That's how big it was for Amazon, because it gave them credibility. They gave them the credibility of Toys R Us. And then some people were like, oh, well, I'm going to Toys R Us. I'm buying my toys. I go to Amazon. Okay, I'll buy something else. And they were. And they did. And that sort of became standard. I mean, I remember a couple years later, eventually Toys R Us made their own website. But at that point, I don't say it was too late, but Amazon sure as hell got the better end of that deal, I'll tell you. But yeah, do look it up. There's a whole bunch of things. Buckaroo Banzai. What about Buckaroo Banzai? I love Buckaroo Banzai and the Eighth Dimension. Now it's the movie portion. And they never did Buckaroo Banzai versus the World Crime League, I believe it was. They did the comic book. That was supposed to be a huge franchise. They even wrote all the scripts. And to this day, it's like I've seen that movie 100 times and still I don't know exactly what's going on in that movie. So have you ever seen Buckaroo Banzai, Mark?
I've not seen Buckaroo Banzai.
You never seen Buckaroo Banzai?
I have not. And
Adventures of Eighth Dimension. You got to see it. It seems like the type of movie actually you would like, because it's insane. It's weird as can be. You would like it because it's really. I put it this way: if you watch it today with today's sensibility, you're like, damn, that is really out there. Back when it came out in the 80s, and I saw that in the theater. And we're like, I have no idea what's going on. Like, I had no idea what's going on. I was like, I'm very confused. I think I saw that. So Buckaroo Banzai, and I saw that I saw 2 movies that day. What did I see? I can't remember the other movie I saw that day. It might have been Back to the Future Part 2. And then I saw Buckaroo Banzai. Maybe it was that. I don't remember. Back to the Future Part 1. I'm trying to remember. By the way, Toys R Us fell because investors dumped debt into it. No, what actually ended up happening is Toys R Us was bought by one of those hedge fund deals. What they do is they buy up viable companies. They then load them up with debt. They borrow against the debt. They stuff their own pockets, and they put them out of business. So Toys R Us actually was one of the best companies in America. They used to pay really well. They had really good plans. I think they even had retirement deals. Like they were considered one of the gold standards of companies to work for. People loved it. Yeah, Vulture Capital. And then I think it was Bain. I think it was Bain Capital bought Toys R Us and KB Toys. Remember KB Toys? They bought both. And they literally, these companies are doing great. They use their leverage of them doing well to then load them up with debt and put them out of business. And they don't care. But I'm talking about Toys R Us did lose out a lot of sales because of that. Their actual website, I remember using it quite a bit. Eventually, it was really good. Actually, their final website after like the 50th time. But I'm talking about the 90s.